She fought the magnetic pull, but his presence alone threatened the walls she'd built around her heart. Hello, and a warm welcome to all you amazing viewers. I'm your storyteller Morgan, and I hope this message finds you well. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you enjoy stories about forbidden romance, real, soul-deep love, and how a single unexpected connection can shatter the strongest control, you've come to the right place. Get ready for a love story that burns slow and transforms everything it touches. If you want to experience a soul-stirring tale that will linger long after, be sure to watch until the very end. You won't want to miss a single breathtaking moment. It's going to be so worth it. So if you haven't yet, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Let's dive into this unforgettable story together. Chapter 1. The Vance Industries Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a shard of ice flung towards the sun. Inside, on the highest floor where the air itself seemed thinner and colder, Alistair Vance's domain existed in a state of perpetual sterile perfection. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city's ceaseless churn, a landscape he commanded with the same detached precision he applied to everything within his reach. The office was an extension of the man, vast, minimalist, ruthlessly efficient. Chrome gleamed under the relentless glare of recessed lighting, reflecting sharp angles and unadorned surfaces. The only sounds were the distant hum of the HVAC system, the occasional electronic chime, and the precise click of his own Mont Blanc pen on the glass surface of his desk. Scent was a non-entity here, deliberately scrubbed away. Only the faintest ghost of ozone and polished metal lingered. Into this frozen kingdom walked Elara Hayes. Her arrival was announced not by fanfare, but by the soft, hesitant click of sensible heels on the marble floor outside his open office door. His previous secretary, a woman of formidable efficiency and zero warmth who had finally retired, had chosen her replacement. Alistair had approved the file with a cursory glance. Elara Hayes, 22, top of her class at a respectable but unremarkable business school, glowing recommendations emphasizing diligence and discretion. Her photograph showed a composed young woman with intelligent dark eyes and rich ebony skin, her dark hair neatly coiled. Competence was all he required. Personality was an unnecessary variable. She materialized at his doorway, a splash of unexpected warmth against the chrome and glass. She wore a simple, well-cut charcoal skirt suit, but the soft ivory silk of her blouse caught the harsh light differently, seeming to glow. Her skin held a depth the sterile environment couldn't leach away, warm undertones of amber and mahogany radiating an innate vitality. Her dark eyes, wide and observant, swept the room with quiet intelligence before settling on him. There was no tremor, no obsequiousness, just a calm stillness that was unusual. "Mr. Vance, I'm Elara Hayes, reporting for duty." Her voice was low, melodious, carrying clearly without being loud. It held a timbre that resonated in the silence, a warm note in the cold air. He didn't rise. His gaze, pale blue and sharp as fractured ice, assessed her from behind the vast expanse of his desk. A fractional nod. "Miss Hayes, your workstation is outside. Mrs. Danvers's procedures are digitized. Familiarize yourself. Efficiency is paramount. Errors are intolerable." His voice was a low, controlled rasp, devoid of inflection. It wasn't meant to intimidate. It was simply a statement of fact, the immutable law of his world. "Understood, sir." She met his gaze directly for a fleeting second, long enough for him to register the clarity in her dark eyes, then inclined her head respectfully and retreated to the antechamber. The silence resumed, but it felt different, charged somehow. Alistair dismissed it as the minor disruption of a new element settling into the machine. He refocused on the complex acquisition proposal glowing on his screen, the numbers and clauses demanding absolute concentration. Yet, peripherally, he became aware of her movements, the soft rustle of paper, the efficient tap of keys, quieter, less percussive than Mrs. Danvers's had been, the faint, elusive scent that drifted in when the connecting door was ajar, not perfume, something simpler, warmer. Vanilla, sunlight on clean cotton. It was maddeningly subtle, yet it cut through the sterile ozone like a blade. Days bled into a week. Elara Hayes was objectively flawless. Documents materialized precisely when needed, immaculately prepared. His calendar, a complex battlefield of shifting priorities, was managed with seamless precision. His coffee, black, no sugar, scalding hot, appeared on a coaster beside his left hand, moments before he consciously registered the desire for it. She anticipated needs he hadn't voiced, moving through the antechamber with a quiet grace that barely disturbed the air. She spoke only when necessary, her questions concise, her answers precise, and yet she unsettled him. It was the quietness, not of subservience, but of deep observation. He caught her watching him sometimes, not furtively, but with a thoughtful, almost curious expression. When he turned his glacial stare upon her, she didn't flinch or look away in panic. She met his gaze for a heartbeat, offered a small polite nod, and returned to her work. Her calm was a counterpoint to his contained intensity. One afternoon, a minor crisis erupted. A senior VP, Henderson, had bungled a critical negotiation through sheer arrogance. Alistair summoned him. The air in the office thickened, turning arctic. Henderson, a man accustomed to bluster, wilted under Vance's silent, seething displeasure. "Your incompetence," Alistair stated, his voice dangerously soft, each word a shard of ice flung with lethal precision, "has cost this division $3 million in projected revenue. Explain how you intend to salvage this wreckage before the board meeting tomorrow, or start drafting your resignation letter." Henderson stammered, face mottled, sweat beading on his forehead. He backed out of the office, a broken man, leaving behind a miasma of failure and fear. Alistair stood rigidly by the window, his back to the door, the knuckles of his clenched fists white. The familiar cold fury pulsed through him, a cleansing, focusing fire. He welcomed it. It was control manifested. The connecting door opened softly. Elara entered, carrying a stack of updated market reports. She must have seen Henderson's exit, heard the tone, felt the glacial fury radiating from him. Alistair didn't turn. He felt her presence pause near his desk. He braced himself for the usual reactions, the averted eyes, the hushed tone, the palpable relief when dismissed. Instead, he sensed her stillness. Then, a sound, soft, almost imperceptible. Not a sigh, almost a breath of amusement, or perhaps understanding. He turned slowly, his expression carved from granite. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the stack of reports she was placing on his desk. But on her lips, there it was, a fleeting, shy smile. It wasn't directed at him, not overtly. It seemed to touch her lips for a mere heartbeat, born perhaps from the absurdity of Henderson's pomposity, meeting its inevitable end, or maybe, impossibly, an instinctive, wordless offering of solace in the face of such controlled rage. It was pure, unstudied, utterly devoid of guile or calculation. Warmth incarnate. It struck Alistair Vance like a physical blow. The meticulously constructed ice within him didn't just crack, it shattered. A jolt, electric and terrifying, arced from his core to his extremities. His breath hitched, an involuntary sound he hadn't made in decades. He stared, utterly frozen, not at the reports, but at the soft curve of her lips where the ghost of that smile had lingered. He saw the warm blush that faintly stained her cheekbones, the way her dark lashes swept down as she finished arranging the files. The sterile air in the office suddenly felt thick, heavy, charged with an energy he couldn't name and desperately didn't want to acknowledge. She finished her task, murmured, "The market report, sir," and turned to leave without meeting his eyes, her composure seemingly intact. But he saw it, the faintest tremor in her hand as it brushed the edge of the desk before she disappeared back into the antechamber, closing the door with a near-silent click. Alistair remained rooted to the spot. The cityscape blurred before his unseeing eyes. The cold fury that had been his anchor moments before was gone, replaced by a chaotic, roaring static. What was that? The question screamed silently in the frozen void of his mind. Ridiculous, unprofessional, dangerous. He catalogued the words, his usual arsenal of control. They felt hollow, meaningless against the visceral memory of that smile, the warmth it implied, the way it had bypassed all his defenses. He became hyper-aware, painfully, excruciatingly aware, not of the multi-million-dollar deal on his screen, but of the soft sounds filtering through the door, the rustle of paper, the tap of her keyboard, the faint, maddening scent of vanilla and sunshine that seemed to cling to the air near the connecting door. He found his gaze drawn to the sliver of the antechamber visible through the glass panel, the curve of her neck as she bent over her work, the elegant line of her shoulder beneath the silk blouse, the way the harsh overhead light caught golden highlights in her tightly coiled hair, softening its edges. Control it. The command was a whip crack in his internal silence. She is an employee, an instrument of efficiency, nothing more. He forced his attention back to the screen, the numbers swimming before his eyes. He assigned her a complex, time-consuming research task via email, impersonal, demanding. He avoided the antechamber entirely, using the private elevator directly to his penthouse at the end of the day, leaving her still working. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the glittering city, a kingdom viewed from on high. He poured himself a single malt, the smoky peat failing to warm the chill that had settled deep within him, a chill that felt different from his usual controlled coldness. This was a vulnerability, a fissure in the permafrost. The next day, the awareness intensified. He noticed the texture of her hair, the smooth darkness of it pulled back into its neat coil. He noticed the precise, graceful movements of her hands as she handled documents. He noticed the warmth radiating from her skin when she leaned over his desk to point out a detail on a blueprint, a warmth that seemed to reach him even across the careful distance she maintained.
The scent of her, vanilla, sunshine, something uniquely her, became an insistent presence. He found himself waiting for glimpses, for the sound of her voice, a traitorous anticipation coiling low in his gut. He doubled down on control. His interactions became clipped, colder than usual, bordering on curtness. He assigned more work, complex reports with impossible deadlines. He scrutinized her output with a ferocity he usually reserved for failing subsidiaries, seeking flaws, cracks in her impeccable professionalism. He found none, only a quiet competence that seemed to deepen under pressure, and a subtle, unnerving stillness that watched him back. One morning, needing her to witness the signing of urgent contracts with a notoriously difficult Japanese client, Mr. Tanaka, he took her in his limousine. The enclosed space heightened everything. The scent of her was stronger here, warm and distracting. The rustle of her skirt against the leather seat was deafening. He kept his gaze fixed out the window, the city a grey blur. Mr. Tanaka values punctuality above all else. Miss Hayes, he stated, his voice tight, ensure the contracts are presented precisely as discussed. Any deviation will be perceived as weakness. Of course, sir, she replied, her voice calm. She was reviewing the documents in her lap. The amendments to Clause 7 are highlighted. His legal team specifically requested the phrasing regarding force majeure. He glanced at her. The morning light filtering through the tinted window caught the elegant line of her profile, the focused intensity in her dark eyes. You memorized the contentious points. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. There was no pride, just simple competence. It seemed prudent, sir, to anticipate potential friction. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, not the devastating one of before, but one of focused readiness. One wouldn't want to be caught unprepared by a dragon. A flicker of something dangerously close to amusement threatened his icy facade. He quashed it instantly. Tanaka is a businessman, Miss Hayes, not a mythical beast. Deal with facts, not fancies. His tone was deliberately harsh. Her smile didn't falter. If anything, it deepened slightly at the corners of her eyes. Sometimes the line blurs, sir, especially when negotiating territorial clauses that resemble hoarded gold. She returned her attention to the documents, her expression serene. Flirtatious banter. It didn't feel like the practiced coquetry he occasionally encountered. It felt intelligent, a quiet challenge, wrapped in professionalism. It unsettled him further. He remained silent for the rest of the journey, the air thick with unspoken tension, and the maddening scent of vanilla. The meeting was a success, Tanaka's stern demeanor thawing slightly under Elara's flawless preparation and quiet, respectful efficiency. She handled documents, anticipated needs, translated subtle nuances without being asked. Alistair observed, a dispassionate commander, yet internally, the turmoil churned. Her competence was undeniable, her presence increasingly potent. Back in the office, the silence felt heavier. He retreated into his glass cage, the door firmly shut, a symbolic barrier. He watched her through the glass panel as she worked. She was organizing a complex travel itinerary, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. He saw her pause, lift a hand to brush a stray wisp of hair from her temple, the movement unconsciously graceful. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, bathing her in a warm golden light that made her skin glow, and turned her simple blouse translucent for a fleeting second, hinting at the soft curve of her shoulder beneath. The sight sent another unwelcome jolt through him. Discipline. Order. He chanted the words like a mantra. He focused on the cold glass beneath his fingertips, the stark lines of his desk, the predictable hum of the city below. He built walls of ice within his mind, thicker and higher. He would master this inconvenient disturbance. This warmth was a threat to everything he was, everything he had built. Elara Hayes was an efficient tool. Her smile, her warmth, her unsettling quietness, they were variables to be managed, eliminated if necessary. His resolve, honed over decades of ruthless ambition, felt solid, impenetrable. He called her in, needing a specific financial projection. She entered, poised, a notepad in hand. Sir, he kept his gaze fixed on his screen. The Q3 projections for the Singapore acquisition, the revised models factoring in the tariff shift. On your desk, sir, she said softly. Top file, tab 3. I included a comparative analysis with the pre-shift projections as well. He didn't look up. Good. Dismissal implied. He heard the soft pad of her retreating footsteps, the click of the door. Only then did he look at the file. It was there, precisely where she said. Impeccable, efficient, warm. He picked it up. The paper felt ordinary, yet he imagined he could feel the trace of her touch on the cover. He dropped it as if burned. The frozen tundra of his internal landscape was no longer undisturbed. A single shy smile had struck like a meteorite, leaving a crater of molten confusion. The ice was still there, vast and formidable, but beneath it, something primal and long forgotten had begun to stir, sending treacherous fissures snaking through his iron control. The unsettling calm was over. The battle within Alistair Vance had begun, silent, desperate, and utterly consuming.
Chapter 2. The pristine silence of Alistair Vance's office had become a minefield. Every click of Elara's keyboard, every soft rustle of paper, every faint sigh of her breath seemed amplified, a siren song cutting through the sterile hum he'd once found comforting. The glass walls, his shield against the world's messy inefficiency, now felt like a cage, trapping him with the source of his own unraveling. The memory of that fleeting, devastating smile, pure warmth against the backdrop of his glacial rage, was a brand on his consciousness, impossible to ignore. He waged a silent, brutal war within the fortress of his self-control. Logic, his most trusted weapon, was deployed ruthlessly. Employee, untouched. Inexperience, power imbalance, professional ruin, personal destruction. The words formed a cold, hard mantra. He doubled down on distance and discipline. Assignments rained down on Elara's desk via terse emails, complex market analyses, historical performance deep dives on obscure subsidiaries, translations of dense technical documents requiring painstaking accuracy. The deadlines were punishing, the scrutiny microscopic. He awaited failure, a flaw he could latch onto, proof of her fallibility, a reason to dismiss the unsettling effect she had on him. It never came. Elara Hayes met each challenge with a quiet, unwavering competence that bordered on the supernatural. Reports appeared, immaculate, insightful, often anticipating questions he hadn't yet formulated. Her calm under pressure was unnerving. He'd watch her through the glass panel, her brow furrowed slightly in concentration, the late afternoon sun catching the rich undertones of her skin and turning it to molten gold, the efficient movement of her hands, the elegant line of her neck as she reviewed a document. These observations, once neutral data points, now ignited a low, persistent hum in his blood. His interactions became colder, sharper. He summoned her only when absolutely necessary, his commands clipped, his gaze deliberately avoiding hers, fixed on a point just beyond her shoulder. He noted the subtle reactions he provoked, the slight tightening of her jaw when he was particularly curt, the almost imperceptible intake of breath before she responded, the way her knuckles whitened momentarily on the edge of a folder. Strangely, these small signs of distress didn't satisfy his need for control. They pricked at him, a novel and unwelcome sensation akin to guilt. He dismissed it instantly. Weakness. One afternoon, needing clarification on a clause buried deep within a labyrinthine contract, he called her in. She entered, carrying the hefty document. He remained seated, gesturing impatiently towards his desk. Section 12. C. The indemnity subclause. Cross-reference it with the liability limitations in Appendix D. She leaned over the desk, her warmth radiating across the cold glass surface like a physical force. The scent of vanilla and sunshine intensified, mixed with the faint, clean fragrance of her shampoo. Her finger, slender and precise, traced the dense text. Here, sir, the cross-reference is actually implied through precedent established in the Blackwood Holdings case, cited in footnote 37 of Appendix D, rather than direct linkage. It creates a potential ambiguity regarding third-party claims. Her voice was low, focused, but her proximity was a live wire against his carefully constructed calm. He leaned forward slightly, ostensibly to see the text, his hand reaching towards the page near hers. Their fingers didn't touch, but the space between them crackled with static tension. He could see the delicate tracery of veins on the back of her hand, the smooth curve of her wrist. His own hand hovered, frozen for a heartbeat too long. He saw the minute tremor in her finger before she pulled it back, straightening up abruptly. A flush, subtle but unmistakable, crept up her neck, staining the warm brown skin. Ambiguity is unacceptable, he stated, his voice rougher than intended. He snatched his hand back, clenching it into a fist on his lap beneath the desk. Redrag explicit linkage, no room for interpretation. He didn't look at her face, focusing instead on the offending clause as if it were the root of all his turmoil. Of course, sir. Her voice held a slight breathlessness he'd never heard before. Explicit linkage it is. One wouldn't want litigious gremlins finding loopholes in the dark. She turned to leave. He couldn't help it. The unexpected metaphor, delivered with such grave seriousness after the charged moment, startled a reaction. Gremlins, Miss Hayes? He raised an eyebrow, the icy facade momentarily fractured by genuine, albeit wary, surprise. Is that the technical term? A ghost of that dangerous smile touched her lips, swift and fleeting, directed at the doorframe as she paused. In my experience, sir, the most troublesome problems often come in small, unexpected packages. Best to lock the doors tightly. And she was gone, leaving him grappling with the absurdity of discussing contractual gremlins and the lingering heat of her proximity. The banter, subtle and laced with an intelligence that disarmed him, became another weapon in her arsenal. He found himself anticipating it, dreading it, craving it. During a tense conference call with German investors, fraught with technical jargon and cultural friction, Elara seamlessly navigated a potential misunderstanding over manufacturing tolerances. As the call ended successfully, Alistair, still riding the adrenaline of the negotiation, muttered under his breath, like herding particularly stubborn cats. Her voice was low, for his ears only. "At least cats have predictable motivations, sir, unlike fluctuating currency markets, though both tend to land on their feet." The dry wit, delivered with impeccable timing, caught him off guard. A sound, perilously close to a choked laugh, escaped him before he could stifle it. He covered it with a sharp cough, shooting her a glare that lacked its usual ice. She merely blinked, her expression serene, but the slight upward tilt at the corner of her mouth betrayed her. The shared moment of levity, however brief and contained, felt like a betrayal of his own principles, a crack widening in the dam. The sensory shift in his environment became undeniable. His penthouse, high above the city, felt cavernous and sterile in a way it never had before. The minimalist furniture seemed cold and unwelcoming. The vast windows reflected only emptiness. He noticed things he'd always ignored: dust motes dancing in a shaft of sterile moonlight, the impersonal gleam of untouched chrome fixtures. The silence was oppressive, amplifying the phantom sounds of her presence, the rustle of paper, the tap of keys, the soft sigh. He found himself cancelling evenings out, the thought of superficial social interaction repulsive. He'd pour a drink, the expensive scotch tasting like ash, and stand at the window, not seeing the glittering city, but seeing the warm glow of the lamp on her desk, the curve of her cheek illuminated by her monitor. One evening, driven back to the office by an insatiable, self-destructive need to confront the source of his torment, he found her. The executive floor was deserted, bathed in the dim emergency lighting that cast long skeletal shadows. The only pool of brightness came from her workstation. She was asleep. Her head rested on her folded arms, turned towards him. The soft light of her monitor played over her face, smoothing the usual quiet watchfulness into an expression of profound vulnerability. Her dark lashes fanned against her cheekbones, her lips slightly parted in sleep. One hand lay open beside her, palm up, looking heartbreakingly trusting. Alistair stood frozen in the doorway, unseen, the roar of conflict within him stilled, replaced by a profound, aching tenderness that terrified him more than any fury. The urge to cross the space, to brush a stray wisp of hair from her temple, to lay his suit jacket over her shoulders, was a physical compulsion. His hand actually twitched at his side. He imagined the softness of her skin beneath his fingertips, the warmth of her breath. It would be so easy. She was defenseless, trusting. The thought, possessive and primal, jolted him. No, this was the precipice. To touch her now, in this state, would be an unconscionable violation, the ultimate surrender of the control that defined him. He clenched his fists, the knuckles white, nails biting into his palms. The pain was grounding. He remained there, a statue carved from conflict, watching her sleep for long, stolen minutes. The sight was exquisite torture, a glimpse of a peace he could never possess. Finally, with a silent snarl of self-recrimination, he turned and retreated as silently as he'd come, leaving her undisturbed. The next morning, she looked slightly tired, but her professionalism was intact. She didn't mention finding anything amiss, but Alistair saw the faint puzzlement in her eyes when she glanced at his closed door later, as if sensing an unseen presence in the night. The guilt gnawed at him, sharp and unfamiliar. His attempts to extinguish her presence extended beyond workload. One day, a small, vibrant African violet appeared on her desk, nestled in a simple terracotta pot. Its purple blooms were a shocking burst of color and life against the gray steel and glass. It offended his sterile sensibilities. "Remove that," he ordered curtly, gesturing towards it as he passed her desk on his way out for a meeting. "This is a workspace, not a conservatory." When he returned hours later, the violet was gone. A flicker of something cold and satisfied, quickly replaced by a deeper, unsettling emptiness, touched him. But later, passing her desk on his way to the private elevator, he saw it, tucked discreetly into the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, the drawer left slightly ajar, the purple blooms just visible, defiantly cheerful in the dim space. She hadn't discarded it, she'd rescued it, hidden it. The act of quiet rebellion, protecting something fragile and beautiful, struck him with unexpected force. He paused, staring at that sliver of purple, feeling the ice within him groan under a sudden, treacherous warmth. He said nothing, but the image stayed with him, a symbol of the life he couldn't seem to eradicate. The torment escalated with proximity. In the elevator, just the two of them descending from a meeting on the 50th floor, the confined space became a crucible.
He stood rigidly against the back wall, staring at the descending numbers. She stood near the front, the scent of vanilla and sunshine filling the small compartment. He could see the elegant line of her spine beneath her blouse, the way a single coil of hair had escaped its knot to brush her neck. The silence was thick, charged. He felt her awareness of him, a palpable tension radiating from her stillness. When the doors pinged open at the lobby, she turned slightly, murmuring, "After you, sir." Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second, dark, unreadable, but holding a depth that made his breath catch. He strode out without a word, the ghost of her warmth clinging to him. The charity gala was an annual obligation, a sea of glittering hypocrisy he usually navigated with detached disdain. This year, Elara accompanied him, a necessity to manage logistics and introductions. Seeing her emerge from her apartment building took his breath away. She wore a simple, columnar dress of deep emerald silk that flowed over her curves like water, leaving her shoulders bare. Against the dark fabric, her skin glowed with an inner light. Her hair was swept up, exposing the elegant column of her neck. She looked breathtakingly beautiful, poised, and utterly out of place in his world of calculated charm and hidden agendas. The limousine ride was agony. The scent of her perfume, something subtle, floral and expensive, replacing the usual vanilla, mingled with the warmth of her bare skin, mere inches away. The rustle of silk every time she shifted was deafening. He kept his gaze fixed out the window, his jaw clenched. "You look efficient, Miss Hayes," he managed, the compliment mangled into something clinical. He cursed himself inwardly. A soft chuckle escaped her. "Efficient is the goal, sir. Though I confess, navigating a room full of potential donors feels slightly more treacherous than managing your calendar." She adjusted a strap, the movement drawing his gaze to the smooth slope of her shoulder. "Any particularly sharp teeth I should be wary of tonight?" He forced his eyes forward. "The usual suspects. Harrington will try to corner you about the waterfront project. Ignore him. Caldwell's wife collects junior executives like butterflies. Be polite but distant. And Sinclair fancies himself a connoisseur of rare beauty." The words tasted like ash. "He's persistent. Find me if he becomes troublesome. Troublesome connoisseurs," she mused, her tone light but her eyes thoughtful in the passing streetlights. "I shall endeavor to be neither rare nor beautiful enough to warrant his attention. Merely efficient." She met his gaze in the dim reflection of the window. "Though one can't always control how one is perceived, can one, sir?" The question hung in the air, loaded. It felt like she wasn't just talking about Sinclair. He had no answer. He simply grunted, the sound non-committal, but his hand tightened on the leather seat. At the gala, amidst the crystal and chatter, her presence was a magnet. He watched, a simmering possessiveness tightening his chest, as she navigated the crowd with surprising grace. She was polite, professional, but maintained a subtle distance, her warmth contained. He saw Sinclair approach her, his predatory charm on display. Alistair watched, muscles coiling, ready to intervene, but Elara handled him with a cool politeness that bordered on dismissal, subtly steering the conversation towards the charity's work before excusing herself. She caught Alistair's eye across the room, offering a barely perceptible nod. Handled. A fierce, irrational pride surged through him, quickly followed by self-loathing. Later, trapped in a tedious conversation with a verbose board member, he felt a light touch on his elbow. "Elara, Mr. Vance, apologies for interrupting. Mr. Tanaka just arrived and was hoping for a brief word before he departs." He seized the escape. "Excuse me, Charles. Business." He followed her towards a quieter alcove. "Tanaka is here?" he murmured. "No, sir," she admitted softly, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. "But you looked like you were contemplating drowning yourself in the caviar. I thought a strategic retreat was warranted." The hint of a smile played on her lips. "Considerate, gremlin management." He stared at her. The audacity, the intelligence, the sheer breathtaking nerve of her, and the fact that she'd read his desperation so accurately. A reluctant, genuine smile, the first in perhaps decades, touched his own lips. It felt strange, unfamiliar. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice low, a thread of something akin to warmth weaving through the ice. "Your efficiency continues to surprise me." Her smile widened, genuine and warm, lighting up her face. "That's the goal, sir, keeping you pleasantly surprised." She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, the air between them crackling in the relative quiet of the alcove. "Now, shall we brave the dragons once more, or perhaps locate a less populated fire?" He offered his arm, an automatic gesture of escort he'd performed countless times without thought. This time it felt monumental. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then rested her fingertips lightly on his forearm. The contact, even through layers of fine wool and silk, sent a jolt through him. He felt the warmth of her touch sear his skin. They re-entered the fray, Alistair Vance moving through the glittering throng with his secretary on his arm, the icy fortress within him crumbling faster than he could rebuild it, consumed by the tormenting, beautiful fire named Elara Hayes. The battle was far from over, but the lines of control were dissolving, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating pull towards the flame.
Chapter 3. The Fragile Truce. Alistair Vance had tried to forge with himself after the gala shattered within days. The memory of her hand on his arm, the warmth seeping through his sleeve, the shared moment of conspiratorial wit in the alcove, they became embers he couldn't extinguish, glowing hotter in the sterile darkness of his penthouse, flaring into dangerous life whenever Elara entered a room. His attempts to rebuild the ice walls felt futile, like stacking snow against a rising sun. The Tanaka deal, the one Elara had helped secure with her dragon management, became the focal point of his unraveling world. A rival conglomerate, led by the ruthlessly ambitious Silas Croft, had been lurking in the shadows. Croft, a man who viewed Alistair's success as a personal insult, had orchestrated a masterful betrayal, leveraging confidential information, likely leaked by a compromised insider. Croft undercut Vance Industries at the 11th hour, poisoning Tanaka's confidence with insidious whispers and skewed data. The deal, worth billions, the cornerstone of Alistair's strategic expansion, was collapsing. The news hit like a physical blow. Alistair stood in his office, the cityscape a mocking panorama of glittering indifference. The usual cold fury was absent, replaced by a chilling void. He'd been outmaneuvered, his control proven illusory. The meticulously ordered universe he'd built was crumbling. He felt hollowed, betrayed not just by Croft, but by the illusion of his own invincibility. The sterile air tasted like ashes. He worked through the night, a solitary figure illuminated by the harsh glow of his monitor, surrounded by the detritus of failure, discarded printouts, cold coffee, the lingering acrid scent of a single, hastily smoked cigar, a rare concession to stress. He barked orders into the phone, his voice a gravelly rasp devoid of its usual commanding ice, trying to salvage shards of the wreckage. His movements were jerky, fueled by a desperate, futile energy. The glass walls of his office no longer felt like a shield, they felt like the walls of a tomb, reflecting his own fractured image back at him. Elara was a silent, efficient shadow throughout the crisis. She anticipated needs before he voiced them, fielded calls with steely calm, her voice a soothing balm against the frantic demands pouring in. She brought fresh coffee, replaced cold cups without comment, organized the chaos on his desk with quiet precision. Her presence was a constant, warm hum against the backdrop of his icy despair. He was hyper-aware of her, the rustle of her skirt as she moved, the focused furrow of her brow illuminated by her desk lamp in the antechamber, the way her lower lip worried between her teeth when concentrating on a complex task. The scent of vanilla and sunshine, usually comforting, now felt like a reproach, a reminder of a warmth he was unworthy of, a life he couldn't protect. Late into the second night, the office was a sepulchral quiet. The frantic calls had ceased, replaced by a heavy, defeated silence. Tanaka had formally withdrawn. Croft's victory was complete. Alistair stood at the vast window, his back to the room, shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. The city lights blurred into streaks of meaningless color. The cold fury was gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying vulnerability. The foundation of his identity, control, power, inviolability, had been pulverized. He felt raw, exposed, adrift. The connecting door opened with its near-silent click. Elara entered, carrying a final stack of documents, likely the post-mortem reports he'd demanded, salt for his wounds. He didn't turn. He felt her pause near his desk, sensed her hesitation. He braced himself for the usual efficient placement, the soft retreat. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, charged with the unspoken weight of the disaster and the heavier weight of everything simmering between them. He heard her soft intake of breath. "Sir." Her voice was barely a whisper, tentative, laced with a concern that cut through his numbness sharper than any accusation. He remained frozen, staring at the distorted reflection of the room in the dark glass, the sharp lines of furniture, the pool of light from her desk spilling through the open door, and her silhouette, small and still beside his vast empty desk. He saw her reflection move slightly, turning towards him. He felt her gaze on his back, a tangible pressure. "Sir," she repeated, a fraction louder, her voice trembling slightly. The preliminary analysis on the Croft maneuver, and," she paused, "perhaps some water." He didn't respond. Words felt like shards of glass in his throat. What could he say? "I failed. I'm broken. I crave the warmth you radiate like a man dying of thirst." He heard her take a hesitant step closer. The scent of her intensified, vanilla, sunshine, and beneath it, the unique warm essence of her skin. It flooded his senses, overwhelming the stale scent of cigar smoke and defeat. He heard the soft whisper of her skirt, the almost inaudible sound of her placing the documents on the corner of his desk. But she didn't leave. He felt her presence, radiating warmth mere feet away, a silent question hanging in the air. He couldn't bear it. The silence, the proximity, the sheer unbearable feeling of her concern, her quiet strength witnessing his collapse. He turned slowly, the movement heavy, deliberate. Moonlight, streaming through the window, caught her fully. She stood there, the stack of files forgotten beside her. Her usual composure was fractured, worry etched lines on her forehead, her dark eyes wide and luminous, reflecting the pale light. They held no judgment, only a deep, aching empathy that struck him like a physical blow. Her lips, usually so composed, trembled faintly. The sight of her distress, for him, was the final devastating crack in the dam he'd been desperately shoring up. His resolve, the iron control he'd wielded like a weapon for decades, didn't shatter with a roar. It dissolved, silently, completely, like mist under a relentless sun. The war was over. He surrendered. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long, silent strides. There were no words. None were adequate. None were needed. His large hand, usually commanding signatures or pointing out flaws, lifted with a shocking tenderness. It hovered for a heartbeat near her face, a silent question, a plea for absolution he didn't deserve. Then, with infinite care, his fingers brushed against the warmth of her cheekbone. The contact was electric, a jolt that seared through his frozen core. His thumb traced the soft curve, feeling the tremor that ran through her. Elara froze, her breath hitched, a soft, startled sound in the silence. Her eyes, wide with shock, locked onto his. He saw the rapid flutter of her pulse at the base of her throat. He braced for recoil, for fear, for the inevitable rejection that would confirm his unworthiness. It didn't come. Instead, her eyes softened. The shock melted into something else, profound recognition, a dawning acceptance that mirrored his own surrender. A soft sigh escaped her lips, not of fear, but of release. Her own hand lifted, trembling slightly, and came to rest, feather light, over his where it cupped her cheek. Her fingers were warm, soft, sliding over his knuckles in a silent benediction. The touch was an answer, a confirmation, a spark igniting dry tinder. The dam broke. He didn't kiss her. He found her. His other hand came up, tangling gently in the soft coil of hair at her nape, anchoring her. He bent his head, his gaze locked on hers, seeing the reflection of his own desperate need mirrored in her dark depths. The first touch of his lips to hers was not conquest, but communion. It was a slow, deep exploration of forbidden territory, a revelation that stole his breath, the softness of her lips yielding under his, the faint taste of mint and warmth, the little gasp that vibrated against his mouth. It was an overwhelming sensory overload that obliterated thought, failure, the world beyond this moment. It was less about taking, more about connecting. A current of pure, unadulterated need, held back for so long, finally surged free. His arms slid around her, pulling her against him, molding her soft warmth to the hard planes of his body. She melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest to clutch at the lapels of his jacket, her response tentative at first, then blooming with a passion that matched his own. A soft whimper escaped her, a sound of pure discovery and surrender that echoed in the silent office. The kiss deepened, became a language of its own. Silence reigned, broken only by ragged breaths, the rustle of fabric as they strained closer, the soft wet sounds of their mouths moving together. He explored the silk of her hair, the delicate shell of her ear, the warm column of her throat, each touch a rediscovery of sensation. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, her body arching against his in an instinctive, perfect fit. The world narrowed to the feel of her, the scent of her, the taste of her. The cold glass walls, the failed deal, the city below, all ceased to exist. There was only Elara, warm and alive, and his in a way that defied reason and control. He backed her gently against the edge of his massive desk, the cool glass a shock against her back, quickly forgotten under the heat of his body covering hers. Files scattered, unheeded. His hands traced the curve of her waist, the dip of her spine, learning the map of her through the fine silk of her blouse. Her own touch was bolder now, tracing the hard line of his jaw, the tense muscle of his shoulder, her exploration as urgent as his. The kiss became hungrier, a desperate affirmation of life, after the numbness of defeat. Alistair, his name breathed against his lips, was a revelation, a sound he'd craved without knowing. It shattered the last vestige of formality. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own blazing with a possessive intensity he couldn't mask. Elara. His voice was raw, unrecognizable to himself. He saw the answering fire in her gaze, the dazed wonder, the absolute trust that both humbled and terrified him. He traced her swollen lower lip with his thumb. This changes everything. A ghost of her old shy smile touched her lips, radiant now with newfound certainty. It already had, she whispered, long before tonight. Her hand slid up to cup his cheek, her thumb brushing the stubble along his jawline, a tender echo of his earlier touch. The ice was always melting. Alistair Hoare, the simple truth of it, spoken in her soft voice, undid him completely. He kissed her again, deeply,
pouring every ounce of his fractured control, his newfound vulnerability, his overwhelming need into the connection. The office, the scene of his professional downfall, became the crucible where something infinitely more powerful was forged. The cold, sterile air was filled with the heat of their breath, the scent of their desire, the silent, seismic shift of two worlds colliding and irrevocably merging. Later, much later, tangled together on the surprisingly yielding leather of his office sofa, bathed in the pale glow of the city lights filtering through the window, a semblance of stillness returned. Elara lay curled against his side, her head resting on his chest, her breathing soft and even. One of his arms was wrapped protectively around her, his hand absently tracing patterns on the bare skin of her arm, where her sleeve had ridden up. Her blouse was partially unbuttoned, his tie lay discarded on the floor, his jacket draped haphazardly over her legs for warmth. The scattered files on the desk were a distant memory. He stared up at the ceiling, the familiar lines of the acoustic tiles unfamiliar in this new context. The hollow ache of failure was still there, a dull throb beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed, muted by the profound sense of rightness that holding her brought. The vulnerability that had terrified him now felt necessary, real. He felt stripped bare, yet paradoxically stronger. He had surrendered his fortress, only to find a different kind of strength in the surrender itself. Elara stirred, lifting her head slightly to look at him. Her eyes in the dim light were dark pools of quiet understanding. She didn't speak. She simply reached up and traced the worry line between his brows with a gentle fingertip. The silent gesture spoke volumes. "I'm here. We're here." He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. The gesture felt foreign, yet utterly natural. "Croft one," he murmured, the words rough but not bitter, simply stating the new reality. Her fingers tightened around his. "Tonight," she said softly, her voice a warm caress in the quiet, "I think we won something far more valuable." She nestled closer, her warmth seeping into him. "The dragons and gremlins can wait until morning." A low rumble, something perilously close to a laugh, vibrated in his chest. He tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer, burying his face in the softness of her hair, breathing in the scent that had become his anchor. The battle was lost. The war within him was over. In its place was a terrifying, exhilarating, all-consuming peace, found in the arms of the one person who had shattered his world, only to rebuild it with warmth and unexpected grace. The breaking point had led not to destruction, but to a transformation he could never have imagined, forged in the silent, shattering beauty of surrender.
Chapter 4. The sterile chill of Alistair Vance's penthouse was the first casualty. Dawn light, previously a cold intruder illuminating dust motes over chrome and glass, now streamed through the vast windows, pooling warmly on a deep sapphire rug that hadn't existed a week ago. It caught the grain of a reclaimed wood console table, bearing not a single austere sculpture, but a cluster of framed photographs. Elara laughing with university friends, Alistair looking uncharacteristically relaxed and slightly bewildered at a small sun-drenched cafe table beside her. The air held a subtle, comforting blend of expensive coffee, the faint, clean scent of Elara's vanilla lotion, and the green, living smell of the thriving African violet perched proudly on the windowsill, its purple blooms a vibrant declaration against the steel and concrete skyline. Alistair stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching her. Elara sat curled on the plush, oversized sofa they'd chosen together, a deliberate rebellion against his former angular furniture. Sunlight gilded her skin as she read, barefoot, wearing one of his old soft Oxford shirts that dwarfed her frame. Her dark hair was loosely piled, tendrils escaping to brush her neck. The quiet intensity of her focus, the soft curve of her lips as she traced a line of text, the utter peace radiating from her in this space that had once been his frozen fortress. It still stole his breath. The familiar ache of possessiveness was there, but it was tempered now by a profound, humbling awe. He had built empires, commanded markets, but this, her presence, her trust, the quiet intimacy of a shared morning, felt like his most staggering, improbable victory. He crossed the room, the silence between them rich and comfortable, charged with an undercurrent of shared knowledge. He sank onto the sofa beside her, the leather sighing softly. Without looking up, she shifted, tucking her feet beneath her and leaning her head against his shoulder, her warmth seeping instantly through the fine cotton of his own shirt. He slipped his arm around her, his hand finding the soft skin of her arm beneath the rolled-up sleeve of his shirt, his thumb tracing idle circles. The city hummed distantly below, a world he still navigated, but one that felt secondary now to this sunlit sanctuary. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, vanilla, sunshine, and something uniquely Elara. She tilted her head back to look at him, her dark eyes warm, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "Just contemplating the sheer logistical improbability," she said, her voice still husky with morning softness, "of the Ice King of Vance Industries willingly sacrificing prime real estate on his minimalist altar for, well," she gestured vaguely towards the violet, the rug, the photos, all this rampant life. He feigned offense, a low rumble in his chest that vibrated against her. "Rampant life. I believe it's called curated warmth, strategic environmental enhancement." He tightened his arm slightly. "And the Ice King finds his throne considerably more comfortable with a certain source of renewable energy nestled beside him." "Renewable energy? Is that what we're calling it now?" She traced a finger lightly down the center of his chest, over his sternum. "I thought it was more like persistent, low-grade thermal disruption." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Melting permafrost can be messy, you know, requires significant structural reinforcement." He captured her wandering finger, bringing it to his lips. "The structural reinforcement," he said, his voice dropping, holding her gaze, "has been the most rewarding project of my career. And the thermal disruption," he kissed her fingertip, "I find I've developed a rather insatiable appetite for it." A blush, faint and beautiful, bloomed across her cheekbones. She pulled her finger back, but her smile deepened, settling into contentment as she snuggled closer. "Flatterer," she murmured against his shoulder. The ease of their banter, the comfortable intimacy, still felt novel, precious. It was a language they were learning together, built on the foundation of the shattering intensity that had brought them here. The office, inevitably, reflected the shift. The connecting door between Alistair's domain and Elara's antechamber remained open more often than not. The harsh overhead lights were frequently off, replaced by the softer glow of desk lamps and the natural light streaming in. Elara's desk was no longer a sterile monument to efficiency. It held her vibrant violet now openly displayed, a framed sketch from her niece, a colorful mug holding pens. Alistair found himself lingering in the doorway, watching her work, not with the old predatory intensity, but with a quiet fascination. He'd lean against the frame, crossing his arms. "Miss Hayes," he'd begin, his tone deliberately formal, a playful contrast to their private moments. She'd look up, a knowing glint in her eye. "Mr. Vance, are those color-coded tabs on the Henderson acquisition files?" He'd gesture towards the meticulously organized chaos on her desk. "Strategic visual optimization, sir," she'd reply smoothly, not missing a beat. "Designed to counteract the monochromatic tendencies of certain management styles. Improves cognitive processing speed by approximately." She'd tap her chin thoughtfully. "Well, let's just say it prevents vital documents from vanishing into the tundra." He'd fight a smile. "The tundra appreciates the consideration, though it wonders if the vibrant hues might attract unsolicited avian attention." She'd pick up a small, polished stone paperweight, shaped like a turtle, another recent addition. "Rest assured, sir, the perimeter is guarded. This particular terrapin has a surprisingly steely gaze, very discouraging to opportunistic pigeons." She'd give the stone turtle a stern look, then meet his eyes, her own dancing. "Or dragons." The shared reference to Sinclair, the dragon from the gala, was a touchstone, a private joke woven into their new reality. It spoke of shared history, battles navigated, and the unspoken understanding that had deepened between them. Their communication flowed through glances, subtle touches, and this new effortless banter that was a constant low-voltage current of affection. When he passed her desk, his hand might brush the small of her back, a fleeting possessive warmth. She'd respond by subtly nudging his preferred pen closer to the edge of his desk blotter, a silent reminder. The power imbalance remained, a reality they navigated with conscious care. He sought her counsel more openly, not just on logistics but on strategy, valuing her quiet insights and unjaded perspective. She, in turn, wielded her influence with grace and discretion, her warmth subtly softening his edges in interactions with others. Colleagues noticed. The glacial stare thawed, replaced by a sharper, more focused intensity that lacked its former cruelty. His commands, still precise, sometimes carried an unfamiliar note of consideration, and Elara moved with a new confidence, her quiet stillness now radiating an inner strength, a grounded certainty that commanded respect without demanding it. One crisp autumn afternoon, they walked through the newly opened Vance-sponsored community garden in a revitalized neighborhood, Elara's passionate project, approved and funded with unprecedented speed. Sunlight dappled through turning leaves, the air was sharp with the scent of damp earth and late-blooming chrysanthemums. Children's laughter echoed from a playground nearby.
Alistair watched Elara speak animatedly with the garden's coordinator, her hands gesturing, her face alight with enthusiasm. She wore a simple burnt orange sweater that set off her skin, her hair catching fire in the sunlight. The pure, unguarded joy on her face was a sight he knew he'd never tire of. It was the antithesis of the controlled, sterile world he'd inhabited, a world he now saw had been half dead. He moved to stand beside her as the coordinator bustled off. "It's thriving," he observed, looking at the neat rows of vegetables, the vibrant flower beds, the buzzing insect hotel, a testament to relentless nurturing. She slipped her hand into his, interlacing their fingers. Her touch was warm, grounding. "Unlike some projects," she said, squeezing his hand lightly, her voice teasing, "this one responded beautifully to warmth and sunlight, minimal permafrost to contend with." He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles right there in the open, uncaring of who might see. "Perhaps the gardener," he murmured against her skin, his eyes holding hers, was simply uniquely qualified to cultivate life in unexpected places. Her blush was instantaneous, beautiful. "Flatterer again," she whispered, but her eyes shone with pleasure. Later, back in the penthouse as twilight painted the sky in streaks of violet and rose, Alistair stood at the window, a tumbler of whiskey in hand, not the smoky peat he used to favor, but a smoother, honeyed single malt Elara had introduced him to. He was reviewing the finalized strategy for countering Silas Croft's maneuvers. The sting of the Tanaka loss was still present, a scar, but it no longer defined him. He saw the situation with a cold clarity. Yes, but also a strategic patience he hadn't possessed before. Protecting what he had built now mattered more than blind vengeance. Protecting her. Elara emerged from the bedroom, barefoot, dressed in soft sleep shorts and a camisole, her hair loose around her shoulders. She padded over to him, slipping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against his back. He felt her warmth seep through his shirt, felt the steady beat of her heart against his spine. He covered her hands with his free one. "Planning Croft's demise?" she asked softly, her breath warm against his back. "Contemplating strategic repositioning," he corrected, taking a sip of the whiskey, savoring the smooth warmth. "Turns out," he added, turning slightly in her arms to face her, "holding on to something precious requires a different kind of strategy than relentless acquisition. Less scorched earth, more fortified gardens." She smiled, reaching up to trace the thoughtful line between his brows. "Fortified with terrapins and African violets." "Precisely." He set the tumbler down and pulled her close, his hands sliding down to her hips. "And a particularly potent source of renewable energy." He dipped his head, nuzzling the sensitive spot just below her ear, eliciting a soft sigh. "Which seems to be running at peak efficiency tonight." She tilted her head, granting him better access, her hands sliding up his chest. "High demand requires high output," she murmured, her voice thickening. "Though the infrastructure might require close monitoring." Her fingers found the top button of his shirt. His laugh was a low, warm vibration against her skin. "Constant vigilance is highly recommended." He captured her mouth in a slow, deep kiss that spoke of possession, gratitude, and a hunger that even now surprised him with its intensity. The city lights blurred outside the window, irrelevant. The only world that mattered was the warmth of her body against his, the taste of her, the soft sounds she made as his hands explored the familiar, yet endlessly captivating terrain of her. It was still passionate, still consuming, but layered now with a profound tenderness, a playful exploration, a deep wordless communication. It was laughter muffled against skin, teasing touches that ignited slow burns, whispered confessions in the dark that weren't words at all, but sighs and gasps, and the rhythm of their joined bodies. Afterwards, tangled in sheets that smelled of them both, the world felt soft, safe, complete. One Saturday morning, they were ensconced in the vast comfort of their new sofa, rain lashing against the windows. Elara was sketching, curled up with a pad on her lap, her brow furrowed in concentration. Alistair was ostensibly reading a financial journal, but his attention kept drifting to the curve of her neck, the way her teeth worried her lower lip as she focused. "What are you drawing?" he finally asked, abandoning the pretense of reading. She glanced up, a secretive smile playing on her lips. "Just structural reinforcement." He raised an eyebrow. "For the penthouse, or the Vance Industries headquarters, planning to add buttresses?" She shook her head, her smile widening, more internal. She turned the pad towards him. It was a sketch of him, not the imposing CEO, but him, leaning back in his favorite armchair, the new one with the deep welcoming curves, reading. The lines captured a relaxed concentration he rarely saw in the mirror, a softness around his eyes, even a hint of the vulnerability she alone was allowed to witness. It was intimate, perceptive, breathtakingly tender. He stared at it, a strange tightness in his chest. "You make me look." He searched for the word, human. Her smile softened, reaching her eyes. "You are human, Alistair. Gloriously, messily, wonderfully human." She put the pad aside and shifted closer, cupping his face in her hands. The Ice King was just a very convincing suit of armor. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a moment. It felt like survival, and now, she whispered, her thumb brushing his cheekbone. He opened his eyes, meeting her warm, dark gaze that held the reflection of the man he was becoming. Now, he said, his voice rough with emotion, it feels like living. He pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in the curve of her neck, breathing her in. Vanilla, sunshine, rain and home. The rain drummed a steady rhythm against the glass, a comforting counterpoint to the quiet beat of their hearts. The transformation wasn't just internal, it echoed in the spaces they shared. Alistair's penthouse was undeniably theirs now. Bookshelves held her novels alongside his business tomes. The kitchen, once pristine and unused, bore traces of her experiments. A colorful ceramic mixing bowl, a jar of exotic spices. His stark walk-in closet now accommodated her flowing dresses and colorful scarves. Even his office bore subtle marks. A framed, smaller version of her sketch on his bookshelf. A vibrant abstract painting she'd loved hanging where a cold, geometric print once resided. The final, unspoken crescendo came not with grand declarations, but with profound quietude. It was another morning, much like the first one in their transformed world. Sunlight streamed in, gilding the edges of the room. Alistair stood again in the doorway, watching Elara. She was at the window now, holding a steaming mug, gazing out at the awakening city. She wore his shirt again, the sleeves rolled up, the hem brushing her thighs. The African violet bloomed cheerfully beside her. He didn't need to call her name. She sensed him, turning with that innate awareness they'd developed. Her smile bloomed, warm and welcoming, lighting up her face and the room. No shyness now, just pure, open affection. She held out her mug. Coffee. I made it strong. Fortification against whatever dragons lurk in the Monday board meeting. He crossed the room, not with the old precise strides, but with a relaxed purpose. He took the mug, his fingers brushing hers, a familiar spark. He sipped, the rich dark brew perfect. Just the usual fire-breathing pension fund managers, he said, his gaze fixed on her. Hardly dragons, more like disgruntled badgers. She laughed, the sound bright and clear. Badgers with very sharp claws and spreadsheets. She stepped closer, reaching up to smooth the collar of his robe. Try not to poke them, Ice King. We've only just finished thawing the last round of frostbite. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs tracing the high curve of her cheekbones, feeling the warmth beneath his touch. The city sprawled below, a kingdom he still ruled, but it held no pull compared to the universe contained in her dark, loving eyes. The journey from the sterile, controlled fury of his old life to this moment, holding this woman who had shattered and rebuilt him, felt vast, impossible, yet here they stood. No more frostbite, he murmured, his voice thick with a certainty that ran bone deep. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was slow, deep, and imbued with the quiet, all-consuming peace of surrender and belonging. It was a kiss that spoke of shared mornings, playful banter, fierce protection, and a love that had irrevocably reshaped their landscape, melting permafrost into fertile ground where life, vibrant and unexpected, bloomed with breathtaking beauty. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the profound, unspoken language of a bond forged in fire, tempered by tenderness, and destined to endure. The transformed landscape wasn't just around them, it was within them, a warm living testament to the power of a shy smile to shatter iron and reveal the heart beneath.